Touch me again and I'll suck all your blood, human. I just smiled and touched her again. The rust-colored winds of Xerion Prime screamed across the jagged landscape like banshees with particularly bad attitudes, and Jax's exploration pod decided this was the perfect moment to demonstrate its impressive collection of warning lights. Red ones, amber ones, and his personal favorite, the flashing blue one that usually meant, you're about to become a very expensive crater. Arya, remind me again why we thought this was a good idea. Jax muttered, wrestling with controls that had apparently chosen today to develop a sense of humor. Mission parameters indicated a 73.4% probability of successful mineral surveys on Xerion Prime. His ship's AI responded in that maddeningly cheerful tone that made Jax wonder if someone had programmed her with a sadistic streak. Current probability of survival has decreased to 12.7% and falling. Thanks for the pep talk. The gravitational dampeners chose that moment to give up entirely, and Jax's stomach relocated somewhere near his vocal cords as the pod plummeted toward the crystalline formations below. Any chance those energy signatures we've been tracking might be friendly? Define friendly. Not actively trying to kill me would be a good start. The impact came with the subtlety of a supernova, and Jax's last coherent thought before the world went sideways was that he really should have listened to his mother about finding a safer career. Maybe accounting. Accountants rarely got thrown around by alien gravity wells. When consciousness finally crawled back through the haze of synthetic painkillers his emergency medical system had thoughtfully injected, Jax found himself staring at a sky that looked like someone had taken purple and orange paint and let a toddler loose with it. Two suns hung in the alien heavens, casting everything in an otherworldly light that made his crashed pod look even more pathetic than usual. Arya? Status report. Static answered him, punctuated by the occasional electronic hiccup that sounded suspiciously like digital cursing. The main console had developed an impressive spider web of cracks, and smoke drifted from what used to be his long-range communications array. Well, this is just fantastic. Jax hauled himself out of the pilot's seat, wincing as his body reminded him that crash landings weren't covered in the standard insurance policy. His scanner still worked, which was something, and according to its readings, the atmosphere was breathable. Mostly. The oxygen levels were a bit high, which explained why he felt slightly giddy despite having just performed an unscheduled meeting with the ground. The pod had come to rest near the entrance to what appeared to be a vast cave system. Crystalline formations jutted from the rock face like frozen lightning, and they pulsed with a bioluminescent rhythm that made Jax's archaeological training perk up with interest. This wasn't natural crystal growth, the patterns were too regular, too purposeful. Looks like we found those energy signatures, he told his broken ship, grabbing his plasma torch and emergency supplies. Try not to explode while I'm gone, would you? The caves welcomed him with the kind of silence that made his footsteps sound like thunder. His torch beam danced across walls covered in hieroglyphs that definitely hadn't been carved by geological processes. The symbols seemed to writhe in the shifting light, depicting scenes of winged figures with distinctly non-human proportions. Their ears were elongated, pointed, and the way they were positioned in the carving suggested they were engaged in some kind of feeding ritual. Charming local artwork, Jax muttered, running his fingers across the smooth stone. The material felt warm, almost organic, and his scanner was picking up trace amounts of exotic matter that shouldn't exist according to current physics. Nothing says, "Welcome to the neighborhood," like pictures of people getting their life force drained. The deeper he ventured, the more the caves seemed to come alive around him. Bioluminescent organisms clung to the ceiling like stars, and the walls themselves appeared to pulse with their own internal rhythm. His scanner was going crazy now, detecting energy patterns that defied classification. That's when he realized the breathing he was hearing wasn't his own. Something moved in the shadows ahead, graceful and predatory. Jax's hand instinctively went to his sidearm, though he had a sinking feeling that conventional weapons might not be particularly effective against whatever called this place home. "Hello there," he called out, his voice echoing through the cavern. "I don't suppose you speak standard Galactic?" "I'm having a bit of a rough day, what with the crashing and the being stranded on a planet that's supposedly uninhabitable." The movement stopped, and Jax could feel something studying him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. His plasma torch flickered, the beam wavering as if something was interfering with its power source. "Look, I know this is probably your place, and I'm sorry for dropping in unannounced. My mother always said I had terrible timing." He took a careful step forward, keeping his voice light despite the growing certainty that he was being hunted. "But if we could maybe skip the whole mysterious alien predator routine and move straight to awkward first contact protocols, I'd really appreciate it." The silence stretched on, broken only by the distant sound of wind echoing through the cave system. Then, from somewhere in the darkness ahead, came a sound that was part laugh, part growl, and entirely unsettling. Jax grinned despite himself. "Well, at least you have a sense of humor." She emerged from the crystalline darkness like death wearing designer jeans, all pale skin and predatory grace. The elongated ears that swept back from her skull twitched at every sound Jax made, and when she smiled, her fangs caught the bioluminescent glow from the cave walls in a way that was both terrifying and oddly attractive. "You know," Jax said, trying very hard not to stare at those crimson eyes that seemed to burn with their own internal fire, "when I applied for this job, the recruitment brochure definitely didn't mention meeting beautiful women with dental modifications in mysterious caves." Vyrex circled him with liquid movements that suggested she'd been hunting things considerably more dangerous than crashed explorers for a very long time. Her skin was so pale it was almost translucent, and Jax could see the faint tracery of what looked like circuitry running just beneath the surface. "Most humans soil themselves when they first see me," she said, her voice carrying an accent that suggested Standard Galactic wasn't her first language. "Or her second. You're either very brave or very stupid. I prefer, charmingly optimistic, actually. It looks better on performance reviews." She paused in her stalking, tilting her head in a gesture that was distinctly predatory but somehow also curious. "You make jokes when you're afraid. How quaint. Actually, I make jokes when I'm not afraid, too. It's kind of my thing." Jax kept his hands visible but relaxed, falling back on his xenocultural training. "I'm Jax, by the way. Explorer, part-time comedian, and currently having what I'd generously call a career-limiting experience." "I am Vyrex of the Kangi," she replied, and the way she said it suggested the name should mean something to him. When he didn't react with appropriate terror, her crimson eyes narrowed. "You've never heard of my people?" "Sorry, no. But I've only been exploring this sector for about 6 months, and my briefings mostly focused on, try not to die, and remember to file your reports on time." He gestured at the hieroglyphs covering the walls. "Though I'm guessing you're the ones responsible for the interior decorating?" "It's very atmospheric." Vyrex's expression shifted between confusion and what might have been amusement. "These are the sacred hunting grounds of my ancestors. You have trespassed in a place where your kind has never been welcome." "Right, well, about that." Jax pulled out his scanner and waved it vaguely at the cave walls. "See, my ship's AI was tracking some really interesting energy signatures, and then we had a bit of a navigation malfunction courtesy of those solar flares, and..." Silence. The command carried enough menace to make Jax's survival instincts finally wake up and start paying attention. Vyrex moved closer, and he could see that what he'd taken for scarification on her arms was actually some kind of biotechnological interface. Thin lines of silver threading through her pale skin pulsed with soft light. "Do you know what I am, little explorer?" Judging by the fangs, the glowing eyes, and the general air of, "I could kill you 17 different ways before you finish blinking," I'm going to guess apex predator. "I am hunger given form. I am the shadow that feeds on light, the whisper that drinks screams." She leaned closer, and Jax caught a scent like ozone and starlight. "I sustain myself on the life essence of creatures foolish enough to wander into my domain." "Okay, that's genuinely terrifying," Jax admitted. "But I have to ask, is the dramatic monologue standard operating procedure, or do you just enjoy the theatrical approach?" For a moment, Vyrex looked like she was considering whether to laugh or tear his throat out. You are unexpected. Yeah, I get that a lot. Usually from performance evaluators, but the principle's the same. He noticed that the biotechnological patterns in her skin were pulsing faster now, as if responding to her emotional state. Look, I know this is probably the part where you tell me about how you're going to drain my life force or whatever, but could we maybe skip to the negotiation phase? I've had a really long day, and I prefer not to end it as someone's appetizer. There is no negotiation with prey, Vyrex said, but there was less conviction in her voice than before. You will serve your purpose, just as all the others have. Others? Jax glanced around the cave, noting the conspicuous absence of skeletal remains. Because I'm not seeing a lot of evidence of previous visitors. Either you're really good at cleanup, or maybe the whole apex predator thing isn't going quite as smoothly as advertised. The question seemed to hit a nerve. Vyrex's expression darkened, and the silver threads in her skin flared brighter. The galaxy has forgotten the Kangi. Our hunting grounds grow cold, and prey becomes scarce. Ah. Jax nodded sagely. So you're dealing with a supply chain issue. Been there, trust me. You wouldn't believe how hard it is to get decent ration packs this far out on the rim. You mock sacred traditions. I'm really not trying to. It's just that I've found humor helps with awkward social situations, and this is definitely qualifying as awkward. He took a careful step closer, watching her reaction. Plus, if we're being honest here, you don't really seem like the type who enjoys the whole predator-prey dynamic as much as you're letting on. Her eyes flashed dangerously. Touch me again and I'll suck all your blood, human. Jax blinked. Again. I haven't touched you yet. You will, she said with absolute certainty. They always do, in the end. They reach out, seeking contact, seeking understanding, and then you drain them? Jax interrupted. Because honestly, that seems like a waste of good conversation partners. Vyrex stared at him for a long moment, and Jax got the distinct impression that he'd somehow managed to derail whatever script she'd been following. Her elongated ears twitched, and the biotechnological patterns in her skin shifted to a softer blue glow. You are very strange, she said finally. Thank you. I work hard at it. Jax grinned and reached out, his fingers brushing against her arm where the silver threads were most visible. See? Touching. And I'm still remarkably undrained. The moment his skin made contact with hers, the cave around them erupted in light. The walls around them shifted like living things, crystalline formations rearranging themselves into new patterns that hurt Jax's eyes to look at directly. Vyrex jerked back from his touch as if she'd been electrocuted, her crimson eyes wide with something that looked suspiciously like panic. What did you do? She demanded, backing away as the cave continued its impossible transformation around them. I have absolutely no idea, Jax replied honestly, watching in fascination as bioluminescent organisms began flowing across the ceiling like glowing rivers. But it's definitely not boring. Vyrex pressed her palm against what appeared to be a blank section of wall, and the stone responded by flowing aside to reveal a passage that definitely hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. Follow me. Quickly. You know, under normal circumstances, following the scary predator lady deeper into her lair would rank pretty high on my things not to do if you want to live list, Jax said, hurrying after her as she moved through the morphing corridors with practiced ease. But given that the alternative seems to be staying here while the cave has some kind of geological breakdown, I'm willing to make an exception. The passage opened into a vast chamber that made Jax's archaeological training start sending up excited flares. The space was clearly artificial, carved from living rock and enhanced with technology that seemed to blur the line between organic and synthetic. Gravity fields hummed softly in the corners, creating pockets of weightlessness where exotic plants grew in impossible spirals. The walls themselves appeared to be some kind of programmable matter, shifting between transparency and opacity as Vyrex's emotional state fluctuated. Welcome to what's left of Kangi civilization, she said bitterly, gesturing at the chamber around them. Impressive, isn't it? It's incredible, Jack said, and meant it. His scanner was going absolutely crazy, detecting energy patterns that shouldn't have been possible with any known technology. How long has this been here? Time moves differently when you're the last of your kind. Vyrex moved to what looked like a control console that seemed to be growing out of the floor. When she placed her hands on its surface, the silver threads in her skin synchronized with patterns of light that danced across the organic interface. 1,000 years. 10,000. The mathematics become irrelevant after a while. Last of your kind. Jax felt his heart sink. He'd encountered extinct civilizations before in his explorations, but there was something particularly tragic about meeting an actual survivor. There's really nobody else. Oh, there are others scattered throughout the galaxy, Vyrex replied, her voice carrying centuries of loneliness. But we've become something else, something the universe fears. We hide in forgotten places, feeding on memories and fading slowly into legend. The console responded to her touch by projecting a holographic display that showed what Jax assumed was Zirian Prime before whatever catastrophe had reduced it to its current desolate state. The planet had been lush once, covered in cities that seemed to grow rather than be built, connected by streams of energy that flowed like arterial systems. What happened? He asked quietly. The Convergence Wars, Vyrex said, and the hologram shifted to show fleets of ships engaging in battles that tore holes in space itself. When the galactic powers decided that hybrid species were an abomination against natural order. The Kangi were too different, too advanced, too willing to blur the boundaries between technology and evolution. Hybrid species. Vyrex turned to face him, and for the first time since they'd met, she looked vulnerable. We began as something else entirely. A peaceful people who discovered how to merge consciousness with quantum systems, to enhance our bodies with biotechnology that responded to thought and emotion. But the enhancement process required. She paused, searching for the right words. Symbiotic feeding. The sharing of bioelectric energy between compatible species. The vampiric thing, Jack said, understanding beginning to dawn. You're not supernatural predators. You're refugees with a really unfortunate dietary requirement. We don't drain life force, Vyrex said defensively. We share it. The process allows us to absorb memories, knowledge, experience. It was meant to be a form of cultural exchange, a way of truly understanding other species. But somewhere along the way, it got misinterpreted as predation. Fear makes monsters of us all, she said sadly. And when entire civilizations turn against you, survival becomes more important than maintaining ethical feeding practices. Jax looked around the chamber again, noticing details he'd missed before. The organic technology wasn't just advanced, it was beautiful, designed with an aesthetic sense that prioritized harmony between form and function. These weren't the tools of a predatory species. They were the artifacts of beings who tried to find a better way to exist in the universe. The elongated ears, he said suddenly. They're not just evolutionary quirks, are they? Vyrex's hand went unconsciously to one of her ears, and Jax could see the faint tracery of biotechnological enhancement threaded through the cartilage. Quantum sensory organs. We can detect fluctuations in hyperspace, changes in probability matrices, emotional resonance patterns. It's how I knew you were different the moment you entered my domain. Different how? Most beings radiate fear when they encounter the unknown. You radiate curiosity. The walls around them shifted to a warmer hue, responding to what Jax was beginning to realize was Vyrex's improved mood. And your bioelectric signature is unusual. Compatible in ways that shouldn't be possible for a baseline human. Jax felt his pocket communicator buzz, a signal that meant Arya had managed to establish some kind of connection despite the crash damage. He pulled out the device, noting the way Vyrex tensed at the sight of the technology. Jax. Arya's voice crackled through the static. I've been analyzing the energy signatures from your location. The quantum resonance patterns suggest you've made contact with a Kangi survivor. You know about the Kangi? Jax asked, surprised. Historical records indicate they were declared extinct approximately 800 years ago following the Convergence Wars. However, several deep space exploration teams have reported encounters with beings matching their physiological parameters in remote sectors. Vyrex moved closer, her enhanced hearing apparently capable of picking up Arya's transmission. Your artificial intelligence has access to historical records. Arya, meet Vyrex. Vyrex, this is Arya, my ship's AI and occasional source of inconveniently accurate information. Fascinating, Arya said. Ms. Vyrex, I should inform you that long-range sensors are detecting 3 vessels approaching this system. Their configuration suggests they are likely rescue ships responding to Jax's emergency beacon. The color drained from Vyrex's already pale face. Rescue ships? Well, Jax said, trying to keep his voice light despite the sudden tension in the chamber, this is about to get interesting. The aurora display painted across Zirian Prime's atmosphere was spectacular enough to make even hardened space pilots stop and stare, but Jax barely noticed. He was too busy watching Vyrex pace back and forth across her chamber like a caged quantum cat, her biotechnological interfaces flickering between panic red and determination gold. 3 ships, she muttered, her elongated ears twitching as she processed data streams that Jax couldn't even perceive. Military configuration. They'll have scanners, weapons, containment protocols. Actually, Jax said, checking his communicator, according to Arya, they're civilian rescue vessels. Probably just responding to my emergency beacon with standard search and rescue equipment. You don't understand. Vyrex stopped pacing and turned to face him, her crimson eyes bright with centuries of accumulated fear. When galactic civilization encounters a Kangi survivor, rescue is rarely the primary objective. Arya, Jax called into his communicator, what's the current legal status of the Kangi species? According to the most recent Galactic Council records, the Kangi were officially reclassified from extinct to persons of extreme scientific interest approximately 40 years ago. This classification allows for protective custody and extensive study. Protective custody, Vyrex repeated bitterly. A lovely euphemism for laboratory specimen. Jax looked around the chamber, taking in the incredible technology that surrounded them, walls that responded to thought, gravity fields that danced to emotion, organic computers that seemed to bridge the gap between consciousness and quantum mechanics. The idea of Vyrex being locked away in some research facility made his stomach turn. Well, he said finally, I suppose we have 2 options. Option 1, you hide down here in your beautiful cave and spend the next few centuries avoiding contact with the outside universe. And option 2. We convince 3 ships full of curious humans that you're not a dangerous predator but rather the most important archaeological discovery of the century. Jax grinned at her expression. Don't worry, I have a plan. Your plans have a tendency to involve touching things you shouldn't touch, Vyrex pointed out. Hey, that worked out pretty well last time. 20 minutes later, Jax stood at the cave entrance waving cheerfully at the 3 rescue vessels that had landed in a defensive formation around his crashed pod. The lead ship's captain, a grizzled woman named Torres who looked like she'd personally arm-wrestled several asteroids, approached with the kind of caution that suggested she'd read too many reports about explorers who'd gone native. Jax Morrison, she called out. We've been tracking your emergency beacon for 6 hours. Are you injured? Physically, I'm fine, Jax replied. Mentally, I may never recover from the paperwork this is going to generate. Captain Torres relaxed slightly. Any sign of indigenous life forms? Your beacon's been transmitting some unusual energy signatures. Funny you should ask. Jax stepped aside, and Vyrex emerged from the cave entrance with the kind of dramatic timing that suggested she'd been practicing. Her biotechnological interfaces were pulsing with soft, non-threatening blues and greens, and she'd somehow managed to make her elongated ears look elegant rather than alien. The rescue team immediately went for their weapons, but Jax held up a hand. Before anyone starts shooting, I'd like to introduce Vyrex of the Kangi. Historian, philosopher, and the sole reason I'm not currently wandering around in circles looking for water. Kangi. Torres's eyes widened. But they're extinct, yes, I know. She gets that a lot. Jax gestured toward Vyrex, who gave a small, dignified nod. It turns out the reports of their demise were greatly exaggerated. One of the younger rescue team members was already pulling out a bioscanner. Captain, if this really is a Kangi survivor, the scientific implications are enormous, Jax interrupted smoothly. Which is why Vyrex has agreed to accompany us back to civilization. Voluntarily. As a cultural ambassador rather than a research subject. Vyrex stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries and the hope of a species clinging to survival. I am the keeper of Kangi knowledge, guardian of technologies that could benefit all species. But I will not be caged or studied like some exotic specimen. The Galactic Council has protocols for situations like this, Torres said carefully. The Galactic Council's protocols were written by people who assumed we were all dead, Vyrex replied. Perhaps it's time for new protocols. The standoff might have stretched on indefinitely if Arya hadn't chosen that moment to contribute to the conversation. Captain Torres, I should point out that Mr. Morrison's exploration charter includes provisions for first contact scenarios. As the primary contact specialist on site, his recommendations carry considerable legal weight. Jax shot his AI a grateful look. And my recommendation is that Vyrex be granted full diplomatic immunity as the representative of her species. The knowledge she possesses about biotechnology, quantum consciousness integration, and hybrid evolutionary processes could advance galactic civilization by centuries. Plus, Vyrex added with a slight smile that somehow made her fangs look charming rather than threatening, I make excellent conversation, and I promise not to drain anyone's life force without explicit written consent. The joke broke the tension enough for Captain Torres to actually laugh. You know what? This is way above my pay grade. We'll transport you both to Kepler Station and let the diplomatic corps figure out the paperwork. As they loaded Jax's salvaged equipment onto the rescue ship, he found himself standing beside Vyrex at one of the observation ports, watching Zirian Prime fall away beneath them. Any regrets about leaving? He asked. I've been alone for so long that I'd forgotten what hope felt like, she said quietly. When you touched me, when the cave systems responded to your presence, I realized that maybe isolation wasn't the only way to survive. The cave systems responded to me specifically. Kangi technology is designed to recognize compatible bioelectric signatures across species barriers. The fact that our systems activated for you suggests. She paused, looking thoughtful. Well, it suggests that the universe might be more connected than either of our species realized. Jax considered this as they watched the stars whirl past. 6 months ago, he'd been just another explorer cataloging dead worlds and filing routine reports. Now he was accompanying the last known survivor of an ancient civilization back to a galaxy that would never be quite the same. You know, he said finally, when I first became an explorer, I thought I was looking for artifacts and mineral deposits. I never expected to find someone who would change my entire understanding of what it means to be alive in this universe. Vyrex's biotechnological patterns shifted to warm gold, and her elongated ears tilted toward him with obvious affection. Touch me again and I'll suck all your blood, human. Jax laughed and reached out to take her hand, marveling at the way the silver threads in her skin synchronized with his own bioelectric field. You know, I think I'm starting to like that threat. Behind them, the bridge crew pretended not to notice as the ship's sensors registered impossible energy patterns flowing between the human explorer and the Kangi survivor, patterns that suggested the beginning of something unprecedented in galactic history. The end.